What's up, NFL fans? Welcome back to another episode of the NFL Whip Around. I am one of the hosts, Jeff Hartman, and joining me as always is Coach KT Smith. Coach, how's it going?
Going great, man. Another exciting weekend of football. Another Steelers victory. Let's go.
Yeah, somehow, some way. And a theme for this podcast, I think there's two different ways that we can talk about this. I think the quarterback carousel is already starting to turn. You know, when teams start to think about switching and going to a different player, we'll talk about some of that a little bit later in the show. But another dominant focus is going to be the AFC North. The AFC North, which is just incredible. It's incredible. 5-4 Cincinnati Bengals are the bottom of the barrel. There's like the NFC South. The 505 New Orleans Saints are at the top of the division. Before we even talk about anything as it pertains to the results from this weekend, what's your take on the AFC North through, I guess, 10 weeks of football?
Well, I think you've got really good quarterback play at the top of the division. I still think, even though Cincinnati's 5-4, I still believe that they and Baltimore are the class of the division. So, you know, you've got two elite quarterbacks in Burrow and Lamar Jackson. And then you got two elite defenses. I mean, Pittsburgh's not an elite defense statistically because they got that bend but don't break defense. But that defense is keeping them in every game. And then the offense is just figuring out, you know, how to score enough points to win. And something similar is going on in Cleveland. Cleveland's getting it done a different way every week, but that defense gives them a shot. So I just think you've got four football teams there that are either being led by great quarterbacks, there's good coaching in the division, or they just know how to win.
It's crazy. Like, I can't remember the last time. Maybe you go back to like when they called the NFC East the Beast of the East, and that they had some really competitive years in that division. This is insane, but the AFC North is going to be featured a lot in the early portions of this podcast. Let's start out with CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans. What a season he's having as a rookie. Goes into Cincinnati, beats Joe Burrow and the Bengals, the red-hot Bengals, who had won, I think, 4 games in a row prior to that contest. And it's the way he's doing it. If this isn't, you know, super careful with the football. He's not turning it over. He's making plays. Had that game-winning drive against Cincinnati. Coach, is CJ Stroud having the best rookie season of any quarterback in potentially NFL history?
You could make an argument, certainly in modern NFL history, that he is. When you go back, so I dug up some stats, and I'm just looking at some of the great rookie seasons. Dan Marino back in 1983, different game back then, but Marino averaged 245 yards passing a game. He had 20 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, but he did that for a pretty good Dolphins team that went to the Super Bowl the next year. You know, Ben Roethlisberger with the 2004 Steelers, he goes 13-0. But you and I know as Steelers fans, he wasn't really the engine that drove that team. Yeah. Andrew Luck, his rookie year, went 11-5 with a Colts team that had been really bad the year before. Had won just one game. He had averaged 273 yards passing the game, but he threw 18 interceptions that year. I mean, Justin Herbert in 2020 set the record for most touchdown passes by a rookie. He threw 31, but again, he was quarterbacking a pretty good Chargers offense. CJ Stroud through 9 games is averaging 291 yards passing per game, which is the most out of any quarterback in history. He's thrown 15 touchdowns and 2 interceptions on a Texans team that won 3 games last year and looked coming into the season like it had one of the worst rosters in the NFL. It's remarkable what he's doing.
So, yeah, I mean, let's talk about his receivers. Tank Dell. I'm sorry. Tank Dell is not a household name. Like, this is not the DeAndre Hopkins Houston Texans anymore, where everyone's like, oh, yeah, like the Texans suck, but they got that guy. They don't have that guy this year on offense. CJ Stroud is that guy, but they don't have any of those players. Who? Dalton Schultz? No. I mean, Tank Dell is the leading receiver, I believe, on that team. And then the other one, his name is slipping my mind, but he's injured anyways. It's unbelievable.
The guy who lit up the Steelers, I don't even remember his name, but he lit them up, man. He looked like DeAndre Hopkins against Pittsburgh.
Yeah, like Robert Woods, I think, is on that team. Like, CJ Stroud is doing this with this cast of characters that no one knows, and they're winning football. Does this speak more to him as a quarterback, or does this speak more to Bobby Slowick's system and the way that he coaches up offense, very similar to the 49ers scheme?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you just get the marriage of the right coach with the right player. I mean, that worked for Belichick and Brady for years. I'm certainly not making a literal comparison here, but if you get the guy who fits your scheme
Yeah.
and you're smart about how you handle them. We talked about this last week with young quarterbacks. Confidence is such a big thing, and they have done a great job this year protecting him, not letting him just get annihilated like some rookie quarterbacks. Some in this year's rookie class have just been absolutely hammered, and you have to wonder, what does that do for their confidence? What does it do for their ability to hang in the pocket? Do they ever really learn to go through progressions in at NFL speed if they're just constantly worried about the rush and having to bail out? So a heck of a coaching job by those guys down there in bringing him along. And now, as he seems to be getting more comfortable, they're lengthening the leash and he's taken off.
And he's not turning it over. That's what's crazy. A lot of times with these rookie quarterbacks, as that leash gets a little bit longer, they get a little bit careless. He's a smart quarterback. He has all the skill in the world. Seems like they got the pick right when they took him second overall after the Carolina Panthers take Bryce Young. And I know we've talked about buyer's remorse before. We won't bring that up, but let's talk a little bit about CJ Stroud's performance and the Houston Texans. Let's say, which is the more surprising result? Was it Baltimore blowing a 17-3 lead at home, M&T Bank Stadium, to the Cleveland Browns? Or was it that Houston Texans team going into Cincinnati at Paycor Stadium and finding a way, last-minute drive, game-winning field goal at the end of regulation? Both of those ended in game-winning field goals at regulation. But, Coach, to you, which was more surprising?
For me, the Ravens squandering that lead was more surprising just because of how dominant they'd been. We were having a conversation on this show last week about Baltimore being potentially a Super Bowl team, just how good that they've looked, rounding into shape in Todd Monken's offense. Lamar Jackson really starting to take off. And so a 17-3 lead for Baltimore at home against a division rival, it seems about as safe as it can be, especially with Deshaun Watson kind of dinged up and not playing great football. And so that one shocked me. And I haven't really fine-tooth combed that game yet to really go back and see how they did it exactly. I'll be curious to see that, but I think that that's going to be a one-off for the Ravens. I don't think that that's a sign of a glaring weakness or something that they need to be worried about. I still think they're pretty darn good.
I'm going to agree with you when the question is which is more surprising. I just think Baltimore's home field advantage is so much better than Cincinnati's. And Cincinnati has a good fan base and they show up. And I'm not saying that they don't, but M&T Bank Stadium is a tough place to play. And even for a division rival to go in there and win is difficult. And to overcome the 17-3 deficit is even more surprising. Meanwhile, the Houston Texans, I've been on their bandwagon since they blew the doors off of the Steelers a few weeks ago. I watched that game, and people probably didn't, unless you were a Texans or a Steelers fan. It's not a marquee game. Who's going to want to watch the Texans and Steelers? They blew their doors off, like I said. And I watched that team, said, this team is going to be good. And they continue to get better. They continue to get better. And I'm also not a full believer in the Cincinnati Bengals defense. Never have been. They let Von Bell and Jesse Bates go in free agency. You just don't replace those two guys overnight. And it seemed like CJ Stroud might have been the first guy this season that said, hey, let's go and pick it. Let's pick this secondary apart a little bit. And so while both were surprising, I'm still going to have to go with Cleveland going into M&T Bank Stadium and beating Lamar Jackson, not to take away from what Houston did in Cincinnati, though.
Now, that's a great point about the Bengals and the safeties. I mean, Jesse Bates is an all-pro safety. And
yeah,
if Steelers fans would be beside themselves if Pittsburgh let Minkah Fitzpatrick walk. And I think that Jesse Bates is comparable. He's having a heck of a season down in Atlanta right now. And I mean, the leadership aspect that the safeties provide is, I think, underrated on defenses. Everybody identifies that with the linebackers, and absolutely the linebackers are great leaders on defenses. But the way that safeties get everybody organized in coverage and communicate everything, I mean, they are the quarterbacks of the secondary. And if you can't find a guy that can do that, those intangibles that don't show up necessarily on the score sheet, it's a huge problem, man. And so that's a great point. I wonder if they'll be able against the elite passers to keep that coverage unit together.
Yeah, I mean, Cincinnati's offense is it's amazing. And Joe Burrow had a great game, and so did Jamar Chase. Like they lit it up, but the defense couldn't hold that lead when it mattered most. That's what's cause for concern if I'm a Bengals fan. And I got to be honest, like you kind of just you think it's a one-off, but if I'm a Ravens fan, I'm not very confident in what I just saw. Like the ability to hold that lead. Now they've done it before. Detroit goes into M&T Bank Stadium and they get boat raced. Almost it's over by the end of the first quarter. And it looked like this was going in that same direction. They lose Marlon Humphrey. Now it's not an Achilles tear. It's actually say it's a calf strain, but still he could be out for a couple weeks. That's got to be concerning for a defense that's supposed to be legit, don't you think, Coach?
Right, and again, man, back end issues. He's a corner, not a safety, but he's a pretty elite cover guy. And again, I haven't gone through that game specifically. I'll be fascinated to see, exactly what was the turning point. Where did a lot of times in games like that there become communication issues that lead to mistakes, and then you can't get them fixed in real time. It's amazing how fast in real time games happen, and when you're trying to solve a problem. And the opponent is exploiting it, and you can't get it fixed for whatever reason. It feels like they're just absolutely gashing you with it, and oftentimes you wind up making desperation moves, personnel switches, scheme switches. If that doesn't catch right away, there can almost be like a panic mentality that sets in. You just feel like you can't stop it. It's a helpless feeling at times, and I'm not saying that's what happened, but the characteristic of the way that those teams were playing is so opposite of how the result ended. So I wonder if maybe, was it an internal issue as much as it was a physical issue with Baltimore?
Got to be honest, though, I was pretty happy when both of those teams lost. I think on Twitter, I used the one of my favorite gifs, which is the excellent by
Mr. Burns.
Gosh, Mr. Burns. Yes.
Yeah, I love that
one. Okay, let's go to the topic number 3, and that is a quarterback carousel, a team that is already starting those wheels in motion, and that's the New England Patriots. So the New England Patriots and Indianapolis Colts go head-to-head over in Frankfurt, and Germany's probably like, oh, yay, and they get a flipping dud. You had a great game last week in Miami and Kansas City, and this week, final score, 10-6. I mean, come on. Like, this is... You said something about the Steelers. This is in a personal text message back when the beginning of the season. You said the Steelers are setting offensive football back 75 years. I feel like you could have said the same thing about this game. Mac Jones has a horrible interception. He gets benched. Bailey Zappi comes in. Not much better. He throws the interception on the last drive of the game. Afterwards, I don't know if you saw this clip, Coach. He's interviewed in the locker room, and they said, what happened? He goes, well, I'm not going to say... I can't say what I really want to say or something along those lines. And it just seems like that whole locker room is a mess. But what are your thoughts on the quarterback carousel in New England? And maybe they're going to be getting a top pick and one of these great quarterbacks coming out of college.
Yeah. So I think there's no doubt that they're going to get a top pick. For me, the interesting question will be, does Robert Kraft allow Bill Belichick to stick around to either A, pick that quarterback, and then B, coach him up? I think that's a fascinating question. Bill Belichick will be 72 years old soon. Whether you mentioned the locker room, sometimes the locker room is a reflection of the culture of a franchise, which is usually dictated by the head coach. I think teams adopt the personality of their head coaches. And when the locker room is kind of falling apart or seems to be divided, oftentimes that's because the head coach doesn't have his finger on the pulse of the team. I don't think the X's and O's have bypassed Bill Belichick, but I wonder if his ability to communicate with players who are as young enough to be his grandchildren, is that an issue right now? And I think, will Robert Kraft allow him essentially to rebuild it? Because when you're picking a quarterback at number 2 or number 3 overall, you're in a full rebuild. And I don't know if Robert Kraft is going to, allow 72-year-old to rebuild that team. What do you think?
Well, let's talk about Bill Belichick, the general manager, for a second. Not Bill Belichick, the coach. He's proven himself as a coach more times than we all want to remember. But as a GM, can you tell me, outside of Tom Brady, a couple offensive players that he has drafted that have really panned out, especially in recent years? I mean, you could go back to when he started back in the early 2000s. I'm sure he had some picks, but still, think about it. Can you name many of those players?
No, probably a couple offensive linemen,
okay,
but that's about it.
Sure.
It never works. The GM head coaching thing never, Bill Parcells once famously said, hey, if I'm going to cook the meal, I want to buy the groceries. And that was his analogy for, why he should be the GM. And they gave him GM title along with head coach with the Jets. And they had a good year or two, but inevitably it didn't work out. It didn't work out for Mike Holmgren. It doesn't work out for most of these guys, man. I don't know if it's hubris, what it is, but they're two different jobs. And coaching is an emotional thing, right? You invest so much emotion in it. Being a GM, I think, requires sort of this like, steady hand and this like evenness that oftentimes you don't find with coaches. And I don't know, it's hard to take off one hat and put on the other without sort of mixing those roles.
Well, the reason I asked you about it, when was the last time he actually drafted a player who's done something, is based on the fact that he has had more failures in terms of drafting offensive skill position players than he has had successes by far. So if I'm Robert Kraft, and like you said, he's 72 years old. Now, rumor was that they just had a new contract done up prior to the season. There are also rumors that teams like Washington might want to trade for Bill Belichick. That's neither here nor there. Do I trust Bill Belichick, the GM, to make the right pick at quarterback? Look at what happened in Carolina this past year. Great quarterback class. Everyone said it's highly touted. Stroud, Young, who's going to go top? And Carolina made that pick of Bryce Young. And I'm not saying Bryce Young is not going to be a good quarterback in the league, but it sure as hell looks like they made the wrong pick when you look at what CJ Stroud is doing. And so when I think about this from an owner's perspective, I don't know if I want Bill Belichick making that pick. And that's a pretty damning statement.
Yeah, the NFL is a different game, especially in the passing game, than it was even 10 years ago. There's the quarterbacks that are coming up now, they're trained differently. The ball is out of their hands so much faster. They're taught to see the game differently, the read option game, the RPO game. Again, I don't think the X's and O's have slipped Bill Belichick, have passed him by, but does he still have the ability to fit what he sees and the way that he coaches the game with the way that young players are being taught the game and what they can now do? I would be nervous about it as well. I might think to myself, hey, it's time now. It's a perfect time, actually, as the quarterbacks kind of get pushed out and we bring in the new guys. Let's reboot the entire process.
Let's go to the simplest form of this discussion. Who drafted Mac Jones?
Yeah.
Did you develop Mac Jones? The answer is no. The answer is no. And he wasn't a top 10 pick. What was he, like mid to late first round pick, I think? So yeah. I'm not sold on Bill Belichick, the general manager, making that call.
And Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yep.
And
that's true.
The big kid out of Washington State or Arizona State that they took. I can't remember his name, the big 6'8" kid. And there've been there were for years, there was all these conversations about, this guy will be Tom Brady's replacement. This guy will be Tom Brady's. And they didn't develop any of them. And then none of them caught on with anybody else in the league. So it's not like, oh, well, the Patriots screwed up, but another team was able to turn this guy into a star. Garoppolo had some success in San Francisco, but I think they're missing on these guys, not just in New England system, but with everybody else as well. They're just missing on them as pros.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But again, it's going to be, if he's under contract, he might force their hand and force them to trade. And we haven't seen a coach trade in a while. It would be interesting to see what those trades, but we'll talk about that as we go. We'll see what happens, and we'll see if Bailey Zappi starts for the Patriots this upcoming week. Let's go to the next topic. Who is one team people seem to be sleeping on who could make some noise come playoff time? Coach, you have to answer that question.
I think there's everybody last year, I think people were like, oh, the Lions, but they're kind of everybody's darling now. So yeah. For me, it's the Seattle Seahawks. I think Seattle is sneaky good. I have a ton of respect for Pete Carroll. I think he does a great job getting his teams prepared. They seem to win close football games a lot. They won a great one earlier in the season in Detroit, in front of a crazy Detroit crowd. It was Detroit's home opener after they knocked off Kansas City. He's done an amazing job developing Geno Smith. My God, Geno Smith was awful for 8 years in the NFL. He was a bad backup for 4 teams. And I think his career starting record as a starter was 13-21. And then he gets to Seattle, and Geno Smith is playing right now like a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. And they've got, if they get a home playoff game, they're probably not going to win the division. I think San Francisco will right themselves and wind up winning the division. But maybe Seattle comes in as a home wild card team, and they got that crazy fan base there. You get a game at home, you win that, you get a little momentum. I could see them going to Dallas or going to Detroit. They've already done it in the divisional round and pulling an upset and getting to the championship game. Now, I don't think they're going to win the championship game, but it wouldn't be shocking to me if they made a run.
Yeah, Seattle's a great pick in the NFC, and I'm not going to disagree at all. The NFC still feels kind of wide open amongst the top tier teams. Like there's the top tier, and then there's a huge drop off even to the middle of the pack. Seattle is at the bottom of that top tier. I like that pick. If I'm going to go with the team, I'm going to go with the AFC. And let me put my homer hat on. I'm going to say the Pittsburgh Steelers. I honestly am going to say the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Steeler fans that listen to this show, because we're both on the Steel Curtain Network, are absolutely going to be rolling their eyes, saying, "Oh, here we go with Jeff again. He's super optimistic." I did an entire podcast segment on this about how Mike Tomlin wants this style of team. He wants this. He wants the offense that, hey, just don't kill us. I call it Devlin Duck Hodges football. Just don't kill us. Don't turn it over. We have an opportunistic defense that's doing it without some pretty big pieces of the puzzle, mind you, with Minkah Fitzpatrick sideline. They lose Quan Alexander. They already lost Cole Holcomb. The inside linebacker position is a concern. I look at the offense, though. They're trending in the right direction. They're running the ball. The last 2 games, they've had over 160 yards rushing as a team. They went over 200 against Green Bay on Sunday. And if you can just get a little bit of production from the passing attack, this is where I think the Steelers could really do some damage. Based on the fact that if they can run the ball effectively, when teams load the box and they can actually attack down the field and win those one-on-one matchups with players like Deontay Johnson, with George Pickens, and even with Pat Freiermuth, when he comes back, if they decide to utilize him properly, I think they could make some noise. Like, that's the question. Who's the team that everyone is sleeping on? People look at the Steelers' 6-3 record and laugh. They say, "Oh, they've been outgained every game and they still are 6-3. This game is a joke." I'm sorry. They're a dangerous team if they get in. So I'm going to say, Coach, I'll let you go.
Mike Greenberg called the Steelers the worst team in the NFL. The worst team in the NFL. I don't have a whole lot of respect for Mike Greenberg's take on a lot of things, but yeah, the worst team in the NFL. So Steeler fans are hating on the Steelers. Now come on, Steeler fans, man. I know there's a bunch of you guys listening right now. Like, why are we hating on the Steelers? Right? The Steelers fans should be thrilled that they're a 6-3 team. And one thing I've always said, Brian Anthony Davis and I were just talking about this. One thing I've always said, I like so much better the us against the world Steelers than the we got this Steelers. I hate the we got this Steelers when they feel like that, don't worry about it. We're playing a bad team or they take their foot off the gas, whatever. The Steelers with a chip on their shoulder is a dangerous football team. And it feels like this year's team is playing like that.
Absolutely. And Mike Tomlin, he's going to relish this. But here's another thing that no one really wants to talk about the Steelers. They are so comfortable in crunch time in a close game. They live it every week. So Kenny Pickett goes out there and needs a game-winning drive. How many times have I done this in my career? 13, something like that, some crazy number. And the defense goes out and, man, we got to make a play here. Oh, okay, we'll just have 2 red zone interceptions of Jordan Love to seal the victory. Or go to Tennessee on Thursday night. Quan Alexander's great leaping interception. They have a knack for it. And here's the thing. Everyone says, like, this isn't sustainable. It's been sustainable for 10 weeks. They have a plus 10 turnover differential. They've taken the ball away 18 times. That's not just a flash in the pan to me. That shows me this is how this team is constructed. And when they get Minkah back, it's only going to be better. Coach, I'm saying the Steelers are the team that people aren't going to want to play, barring this inside linebacker situation completely derailing things.
Now watch the Steelers and the Seahawks not even get into the playoffs.
That's fine. I'm going to take my homer hat off now. Let's move to the 5th and final segment here. The Dallas Cowboys, they're 6-3. They have a top 5 offense and defense. They've scored at least 38 points for the 4th time this year on Sunday in the 49-17 shellacking of the Giants. But they've also lost to Arizona. They got embarrassed by San Francisco, and they lost a close one to the NFC East division leading Philadelphia Eagles. What are your takes on the Cowboys? It's really tough to gauge some of these teams. The Cowboys are one of them. Are they contenders, or as you put it, are they frauds?
For me, the Cowboys will always be frauds until they prove otherwise. I was listening to, so they beat the Giants on Sunday 49-17. This is coming after beating the Giants 40-0 on opening weekend. So 89-17 over the Giants. Great. That's great. You beat up on a terrible Giants team. Dak Prescott looked awesome. And they've got talent. Boy, do they got talent. Their receiving core scares the heck out of people, and understandably so. The defense scares people. I mean, they've got all the pieces for sure. But the Cowboys have just shown over and over and over and over again since they won their last Super Bowl back in the mid-1990s that in the big spots they come up short. And I don't know why that is. It's because they've gone through several coaches, they've gone through several quarterbacks. Some franchises, man, they get a little bit of that stigma, like they can't deliver in the big moment, and you can't do it until you do it, and they just haven't done it. So as good as they look at times, until they show up on the biggest stage and play great football, I'm not a believer.
Wow, I mean, this is very similar conversation to like the Miami Dolphins. When you look at, okay, who have they beaten and who have they lost to? And then you look at every time they play a legitimate team, they lose. The Cowboys, they're very similar, but they lost to Arizona in that really fluky game. The 49ers blew their doors off. I feel like the Dallas Cowboys are a team that if it's not a divisional game, if you can get a lead and you force the game into Dak Prescott's hand, that's where you're going to win. I still think they are contenders, at least in the NFC. I don't think they're a contender for the Super Bowl, but I do think that they're going to be in the mix. They're going to be in the playoffs. They'll be a tough out. You also have to get them away from home. They're a much different team in Dallas than they are on the road. So if you get them away from home, you have a good chance of winning. Dallas is, again, like Miami, sometimes even like Buffalo, Kansas City. You just don't know what you're going to get from a week in, week out basis. Now, some of the teams I just named are way more consistent, but I think they have a great defense, and their offense, like you said, loaded with skill position players. I'm going to go with contender, though. Not just to disagree, but I think that they have a good team. But yeah, they got to prove it. They have to prove it because they haven't done it yet. So any other thoughts on the Cowboys?
Other than, does anybody call them America's team anymore? Is that still a thing?
Oh, it is for the announcers. They always say that. America's team, Dallas Cowboys. Yeah.
That's what because I wondered about that. I wondered if that thing still stays with them because they're very popular, obviously nationally. They've got a very marketable brand. And I always wondered, like, is that they're always a good football team, but they've won. I might get the statistic wrong, but they've only won something like 4 playoff games since their last Super Bowl, which was almost 30 years ago. And so, I mean, that's hype. You're just hyping this team constantly. I think they're living off the reputation that they had when they were quote unquote America's team. So if they were a different franchise and they'd only produced 4 playoff wins in 28 years and every year seemed to be good and just didn't deliver, they'd be the Chargers.
Yeah. Chargers are going to Charger. Yeah. All right. Let's finish up with our player profile. We didn't really know where to go, and I said, let's talk about Sam Howell. Sam Howell. Now, Washington did not win their game this week. They lost to Seattle. Sam Howell, to me, is a very intriguing prospect. First and foremost, the Steelers were in that mix for a quarterback in that draft class. They obviously chose Kenny Pickett at 20th overall in the first round in 2022. They had shown interest in Sam Howell from North Carolina, and he didn't get drafted until the 5th round. So Washington takes a flyer on this guy in the 5th round. He's bouncing around. He's in the lineup, out of the lineup. They decide to go with him. He's their guy. I think he's proven that, number one, he's tough as hell. The guy gets sacked a million times. I don't know if he's still on pace to set the new record for sacks in a season. Holds onto the ball a little too long sometimes, obviously, but man, he stands in the pocket. He's got a hell of an arm. He looks like a winner. Sam Howell, as a 5th round draft pick, is making the Washington Commanders think that even though they might have been like, okay, we're going to trade away Chase Young and Montez Sweat, it makes people think maybe they have their quarterback. Coach, what do you think about Sam Howell?
I like him. I like his aggressiveness. I like his attitude. He's got that sort of fiery demeanor that your teammates will rally around. I think he's got the chip on his shoulder as a 5th-round pick. He probably believes that he was better than a lot of the guys that went before him. He's coming out of North Carolina, which has been really good at producing college quarterbacks recently. I mean, Mitchell Trubisky hasn't turned out to be a great pro, but he was an excellent college quarterback there. And Hal and now Drake May at Carolina is going to be one of the top picks in the draft. So they certainly have prepared their quarterbacks well. I mean, the only thing that makes me nervous about Sam Howell is he gives me a little bit of a Baker Mayfield vibe, a little bit of just that, like he could get on a heater, man, and really light it up for a few weeks, and then all of a sudden he could just throw some terrible interceptions. Is that aggressiveness going to be used against him once NFL teams really start to figure him out? When they really start to scheme to take away the things he does best, is he going to make the big mistakes and not learn from his lessons? I think that's been one of the things that's derailed Baker Mayfield's career is he just doesn't seem to learn from some of the things that he does wrong. So that'll be a thing for me to watch with Sam Howell.
That's a very bad comp if you're comparing him to Baker Mayfield.
Like he might not be. He might not be at all.
Yeah.
He just his style is reminiscent of it, however.
I mean, when you look at Sam Howell, here's why I picked him for the player profile. You could make a case that he's outplaying Kenny Pickett. He outplayed Desmond Ridder. And those guys were drafted well before he was. And so here he is, a 5th-round pick, like you said, chip on the shoulder. Maybe he thinks I have nothing to lose. What do I have to lose? I'm just going to go out there and sling the ball around. That's fine. Hey, he's fun to watch. They didn't win the game. Washington has an uphill battle, not just the rest of the season, but probably when they go through the coaching search. But maybe they have their quarterback. I don't know. All right, Coach, any final thoughts?
Again, it continues to be a really unpredictable league. Here we were a week ago. What's wrong with the 49ers? Then they come out and absolutely smash Jacksonville. Oh, Baltimore and Cincinnati, they look like dominant teams. Then they both get beat at home. I just don't think that you can really get a beat on what's going to happen on a weekly basis right now.
No, I don't think you can. I'm just shocked that we made it through an entire episode and we didn't bring up the officiating. Like that's like mark the tape. Mark this. I'm not. I didn't bring up specific examples. I could, but I'm not. We did it. I didn't think it was possible, but we did it. Coach, why don't you tell everyone what's coming up on the call sheet this week?
Yeah, so we've been talking about quarterbacks a lot. So I just wrote an article for FFSN where we're kind of created some quarterback tiers, and we're sort of tiering the NFL quarterbacks after 10 weeks of the season. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Continue to do some tributes to guys who wear the number of the episode. But if you'll indulge me for a sec, I'm gonna plug my first video breakdown that I'm gonna work on this week. And you can probably give better details about where that's gonna run. But I'm gonna start to do some YouTube breakdowns on using video, and I'm pretty excited to be able to kind of jump into the coaching aspect of that.
Yeah, so Kevin's going to have it. This will only be the visual aspects. So those that are listening on audio side right now, you'll be able to find, like if he does a Steelers breakdown, that'll be on our Steel Curtain Network YouTube channel. And all the other ones will be on our Fans First Sports Network YouTube channel, which you can go and you can watch the call sheet. You can watch my Fans First Football show. You can watch Pez's Picks. All those shows are on the video side there, and we're going to start adding some more to that. So go subscribe to that channel so you won't miss any of that great content. But Coach, tell them where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, on Twitter at KT Smith FFSN. I'll plug my boy Pez again. 2-0, Jeff. He's got 6 in a row in the NFL.
Well, yeah, he's got 6 in a row in the NFL, and he only lost one college game. He went 2 out of 3, 2 for 3 in the college, and he went 2-0 in NFL. He is red hot. If people aren't listening to Pez's Picks, go to Pez's Picks. You go to just search wherever you get your podcast, Pez's Picks. The show comes out Thursday morning. The dude's been red hot. I had to put him over the coals a little bit, but once I did, he started to deliver.
Maybe he's picking games at a 60% clip. If you're hitting 60% in the gambling world, you're making a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. He's got to be above 60% now. Hell, he's been perfect in the NFL last 2 weeks. So go check out Pez's Picks. Coach, as always, thank you for your time. Hey, check us out next time on the NFL Whip Around. We'll see you. Take it easy, Coach.